Behind the gilded gates of Ravenswood Palace, where centuries of tradition dictate every breath and bow, a single moment of defiance would shatter the carefully constructed facade of royal unity. When Lady Isabella Thornfield, the kingdom's beloved equestrian champion and niece to the king, chose to walk past Queen Consort Vivian without the customary curtsy during the annual Harvest Gala, she unknowingly lit a fuse that would expose decades of buried resentments, family secrets, and a power struggle that threatens the very foundation of the monarchy. What started as a perceived slight would unravel into a scandal involving forbidden love affairs, blackmail, stolen inheritances, and a truth so devastating that it could topple the crown itself. In a world where every gesture carries the weight of history, and every silence speaks volumes, Isabella's act of rebellion becomes the catalyst for revelations that will change the royal family forever. Some say she was protecting a secret. Others whisper she was seeking revenge. But the truth behind Isabella's stunning public snub is far more complex and dangerous than anyone could imagine. As palace walls begin to crumble under the weight of long-buried truths, the question isn't just why Isabella defied protocol, it's whether the monarchy can survive what comes next. This is the story of how one woman's courage to stand against tradition exposed the rot at the heart of a kingdom, and why sometimes the most dangerous enemy to a throne isn't a foreign army or political uprising, but the truth itself. The crystal chandeliers of Ravenswood Palace's grand ballroom cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as the kingdom's elite gathered for the annual Harvest Gala. Lady Isabella Thornfield adjusted her emerald silk gloves for the third time in 5 minutes, her usually steady hands betraying the turmoil churning beneath her composed exterior. At 28, Isabella commanded respect not just as the king's niece, but as the kingdom's most accomplished equestrian, having brought home 3 consecutive international championship titles that had elevated the nation's sporting reputation to unprecedented heights. Tonight, however, horses were the furthest thing from her mind. Hidden beneath the folds of her midnight blue gown was a letter that had arrived that morning bearing the royal seal, but containing words that had shattered her world. The elegant script, written in Queen Consort Vivian's own hand, had confirmed Isabella's worst suspicions about the woman who had married into their family 5 years ago, and slowly but systematically worked to poison the king against his own blood relatives. The ballroom buzzed with the usual suspects of high society. Foreign ambassadors mingled with cabinet ministers, while hereditary peers exchanged pleasantries with newly minted knights. The scent of white roses and jasmine hung heavy in the air, mixed with the subtle aroma of the evening's featured delicacies that had been flown in from the kingdom's finest establishments. Isabella watched it all with detached observation, her mind replaying the contents of that devastating letter over and over. Lord Hamilton approached her with his characteristic broad smile, his military decorations gleaming against his dress uniform. "Lady Isabella, you look absolutely radiant this evening, though I must say you seem rather pensive for such a festive occasion." His genuine concern touched her. Hamilton had served alongside her father in the Royal Guards before her father's mysterious death in what had been ruled a hunting accident 3 years ago. "Thank you, Lord Hamilton. I suppose I have much on my mind lately." Isabella's voice carried a weight that made the older man study her more carefully. He had always been direct, a trait that sometimes ruffled feathers in court, but had endeared her to the common people who saw her as refreshingly authentic in a world of calculated gestures. Before Hamilton could respond, the orchestra struck up the ceremonial fanfare that announced the arrival of the royal family. The crowd parted like silk curtains, creating a pathway adorned with bowed heads and lowered eyes. King Edward entered first, his silver hair immaculately styled, and his bearing still commanding despite the subtle stoop that had developed since his second marriage. Behind him walked Queen Consort Vivian, resplendent in a gown of champagne silk that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Vivian moved with calculated grace, her smile perfect and cold. She had mastered the art of appearing warm while keeping everyone at a distance that suited her purposes. Her dark hair was swept into an elaborate updo that showcased the diamond tiara that had once belonged to Isabella's grandmother, the previous queen. That tiara should have been passed down through the family line, but somehow Vivian had convinced the king that it rightfully belonged to her as his current consort. Prince Marcus, the king's younger brother, and Isabella's father should have been walking behind them. Instead, his absence hung like a shadow over the proceedings. The official story was still the hunting accident, but Isabella had spent sleepless nights piecing together inconsistencies in the reports and witness statements that painted a far more sinister picture. As the royal party made their rounds, accepting the traditional greetings and acknowledgments from the assembled guests, Isabella felt her heart rate quicken. She knew this moment would come. Protocol demanded that she approach the king and queen consort, offer the customary curtsy, and exchange the expected pleasantries. For 5 years, she had performed this ritual without question, playing her part in the elaborate theater of royal etiquette. But tonight would be different. The letter had contained information that changed everything. Vivienne had not simply married into the royal family out of love or even political convenience. She had orchestrated a campaign of manipulation that stretched back years before she ever appeared at court. The letter detailed how she had systematically gathered intelligence on the family's weaknesses, financial vulnerabilities, and personal secrets. More damaging still were the revelations about her role in undermining Prince Marcus's reputation in the months leading up to his death. Isabella had suspected for months that her father's death was not accidental. Marcus had been an experienced hunter and outdoorsman who knew the royal estates better than anyone. The idea that he would carelessly venture into the restricted hunting grounds during rutting season, when the stags were most aggressive, had never sat well with her. But the letter provided evidence that Vivienne had manipulated the hunting schedule, ensuring that Marcus would be in that specific location at that exact time, knowing full well the dangers he would face. The crowd's murmur grew softer as the royal couple approached Isabella's section of the ballroom. She could feel dozens of eyes upon her, waiting to witness the familiar ritual of royal acknowledgement. Lord Hamilton stepped aside with practiced deference, joining the circle of onlookers who would bear witness to whatever was about to unfold. Queen Consort Vivienne's eyes met Isabella's across the small space that separated them. For just a moment, something flickered in Vivienne's gaze, perhaps recognition that something had shifted, that the usual power dynamic was about to be challenged. Isabella saw calculation there, the same look she had observed countless times when Vivienne was maneuvering to get her way in family matters or court politics. King Edward, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, smiled warmly at his niece. "Isabella, my dear, you look lovely this evening. I trust your preparations for next month's international competition are proceeding well." His genuine affection for her was clear, which made Vivienne's manipulations all the more painful to contemplate. "Thank you, uncle. The horses are in excellent form." Isabella's response was measured, proper, but those close enough could detect the slight tremor in her voice that suggested emotional strain. She had always called him uncle rather than the formal "Your Majesty" in private family settings, a privilege that had been gradually extended to these semi-public occasions as well. Now came the moment of truth. Protocol demanded that Isabella acknowledge Queen Consort Vivienne with a curtsy and some form of respectful greeting. The assembled crowd expected it. The cameras, discreetly positioned throughout the ballroom, were recording it. History would judge what happened next. Isabella looked directly at Vivienne, her green eyes steady and unflinching. The Queen Consort's painted smile remained perfectly in place, but something in her posture suggested she sensed the danger of this moment. Isabella could see the calculation happening behind Vivienne's eyes, the rapid assessment of potential threats and responses. And then Isabella did the unthinkable. She turned away without acknowledging Queen Consort Vivienne at all. No curtsy, no greeting, no recognition whatsoever of the woman's royal status or even her basic presence. Isabella simply pivoted on her heel and walked toward the garden doors, her head held high and her stride purposeful. The effect was immediate and electric. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as hundreds of witnesses processed what they had just observed. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Wine glasses paused halfway to lips. The orchestra, sensing the shift in atmosphere, let their music fade to uncertainty. King Edward's face registered confusion first, then concern. He looked between his wife and his niece, clearly uncertain about what had just transpired or how he should respond. In 40 years of public life, he had never witnessed such a blatant breach of royal protocol, especially not from a member of his own family. Queen Consort Vivienne's mask slipped for just an instant, revealing a flash of fury that transformed her features before she quickly regained control. But that momentary lapse had been observed by enough keen-eyed courtiers to ensure that news of her reaction would spread as quickly as news of Isabella's snub itself. Lord Hamilton found himself in an impossible position. As someone loyal to both the crown and to Isabella's father's memory, he was torn between following protocol and following his instincts about what was truly happening. He chose to excuse himself quietly from the immediate area, neither condemning nor supporting Isabella's actions, but simply removing himself from the epicenter of what was clearly about to become a royal scandal of epic proportions. Isabella continued her walk toward the garden doors, her pace neither hurried nor slow, but deliberate. She could feel the weight of hundreds of stares burning into her back, could practically hear the frantic whispered conversations beginning to erupt throughout the ballroom. Mobile phones were discreetly emerging from evening bags and jacket pockets as guests began documenting and sharing what they had witnessed. As she reached the French doors that led to the palace gardens, Isabella paused for just a moment. She did not turn around, did not acknowledge the chaos she was leaving behind, but something in her posture suggested this was not a moment of doubt or regret. This was a moment of resolve, of a line being crossed from which there would be no return. The cool night air hit her face as she stepped onto the stone terrace that overlooked the formal gardens. Behind her, the ballroom was erupting into barely contained chaos as guests tried to process what they had witnessed while maintaining some semblance of proper behavior. The king was being surrounded by advisors and protocol officers, all speaking in urgent whispers about damage control and appropriate responses. Queen Consort Vivian stood at the center of it all, her smile now rigid and her eyes calculating the cost of what had just happened. She understood better than anyone that Isabella's public snub was not just a breach of etiquette, it was a declaration of war. But what Vivian did not yet know was that Isabella had evidence capable of destroying not just her reputation, but her freedom as well. The letter hidden in Isabella's gown contained proof of crimes that went far beyond social manipulation or family politics. It contained evidence of murder. As Isabella walked deeper into the gardens, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her most trusted ally, a former intelligence officer who had served her father and who had been quietly investigating the circumstances of Prince Marcus's death for 3 years. The message was brief but electrifying. Package secured. Location confirmed. Ready when you are. The package referred to additional evidence that would corroborate everything in the letter. The location was where that evidence had been hidden for years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And Isabella was indeed ready. Behind her, the lights of the ballroom continued to blaze as the kingdom's elite grappled with the implications of what they had witnessed. None of them yet understood that Isabella's public snub was merely the opening move in a much larger game that would shake the foundations of the monarchy itself. The war for truth had begun, and Isabella had just fired the first shot. The morning after the harvest gala dawned gray and unforgiving, with storm clouds gathering over Ravenswood Palace like an omen of the chaos to come. Isabella stood at the window of her private apartments, watching the grounds crew hurriedly clear away the remnants of the previous evening's festivities. Even from her third-floor vantage point, she could see the unusual bustle of activity below, additional security personnel, extra staff members, and the unmistakable presence of royal advisors arriving earlier than usual for what would undoubtedly be emergency meetings. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly since dawn with calls from reporters, friends, distant relatives, and palace officials. Each notification felt like another nail in the coffin of her old life, the life where she could compete internationally, represent her country with pride, and maintain some semblance of normalcy despite her royal connections. That life had ended the moment she walked away from Queen Consort Vivian without acknowledgement. A soft knock interrupted her brooding. "Come in," she called, recognizing the particular rhythm that belonged to Mrs. Pembridge, her longtime personal secretary, and the closest thing to a mother figure she had known since her own mother's death when she was 16. The elderly woman entered, carrying a silver tray with tea, and what appeared to be every major newspaper published in the kingdom. Mrs. Oak Pembridge had worked for the royal family for over 30 years, serving Isabella's grandmother first, then her father, and finally Isabella herself. If anyone could navigate the treacherous waters of royal scandal while maintaining absolute discretion, it was Margaret Pembridge. "I thought you might want to see these before the palace communication staff attempts their damage control," Mrs. Pembridge said, setting the tray on the mahogany side table and laying out the newspapers with practiced efficiency, "though I suspect you already know the general tenor of the coverage." The headlines were as brutal as expected. "Royal Snub, Shocks Kingdom," blazed across the front page of the Morning Herald, accompanied by a photograph that captured the exact moment Isabella turned away from Queen Consort Vivian. The Royal Tribune had gone with "Family Feud erupts at Palace Galea," while the more sensationalist Daily Crown screamed, "Princess Isabella's ultimate insult." "They're calling for official responses, of course," Mrs. Pembridge continued, pouring tea with steady hands despite the storm brewing around them. "Lord Chancellor Pemberton has already issued 3 separate statements trying to minimize the situation, but the international press has picked up the story. CNN, BBC, and every major European outlet are running with it." Isabella accepted the delicate china cup, grateful for its warmth against her suddenly cold fingers. "Have there been any official communications from the palace? Any summons?" "Not yet, but I expect that will change within the hour. The king is reportedly meeting with his senior advisors, and Queen Consort Vivienne has requested an emergency session with the Privy Council." Mrs. Pembridge paused, studying Isabella's face carefully. "My lady, if I may speak freely, what you did last night was either very brave or very dangerous. Possibly both." Isabella met the older woman's concerned gaze. Margaret Pembridge had been present during her father's final weeks, had witnessed the gradual changes in palace dynamics after Vivian's arrival, and had observed the subtle but persistent campaign to isolate and marginalize anyone who might pose a threat to the new queen consort's influence. If anyone could be trusted with the truth, it was Mrs. Pembridge. Margaret, what do you remember about the weeks before my father's death? Specifically, about his state of mind and his concerns about palace security. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Pembridge set down her own teacup and moved to close the apartment door fully, then returned to her chair with the deliberate movements of someone who understood the gravity of what was being discussed. Your father was troubled in those final weeks, she said carefully. He had been conducting his own investigation into certain financial irregularities within the royal household accounts. Nothing dramatic enough to warrant public attention, but patterns that concerned him as someone who understood how palace operations should function. Isabella leaned forward, her pulse quickening. Financial irregularities involving whom? He never said explicitly, but he did ask me to help him research the backgrounds of several people who had joined the palace staff in the 2 years before the king's second marriage. He seemed particularly interested in their previous employment history and any connections they might have to external organizations. This was new information. Isabella had suspected that Vivian had placed allies within the palace staff, but she had never considered that her father might have been actively investigating this before his death. Did he share any of his findings with you, Mrs. Death? Did he share any of his findings with you? Mrs. Pembridge rose and moved to the bookshelf that lined one wall of the sitting area. She removed what appeared to be a leather-bound volume of poetry, but revealed it to be a concealed folder when she opened it. He asked me to keep these safe and to give them to you if anything happened to him. I had hoped never to have this conversation. Isabella's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the folder. Inside were dozens of documents, photographs, and what appeared to be financial records spanning several years. The top document was a detailed analysis of money transfers that showed systematic payments from accounts connected to foreign business interests into what appeared to be a network of shell companies. This suggests that someone was being paid substantial sums to provide information about royal family activities, security protocols, and internal palace politics. Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. The timing of these payments corresponds directly with Vivian's courtship of Uncle Edward. Mrs. Pembridge nodded gravely. Your father believed that the queen consort had been planning her integration into the royal family for years before she ever met the king. He suspected that their chance encounter at the charity gala was anything but coincidental. Isabella continued studying the documents, her anger building with each revelation. Bank transfers showed payments to individuals who had subsequently been hired into key positions within the palace hierarchy. Security guards, kitchen staff, housekeeping personnel, and even some lower-level administrative positions had been filled by people with connections to Vivian's network. This means she had access to our family's private information, our schedules, our personal habits, everything she would need to manipulate situations to her advantage, Isabella realized. She knew exactly how to approach Uncle Edward because she had been studying him for months, possibly years. A photograph near the bottom of the stack showed Vivian at what appeared to be a business meeting with several men in expensive suits. The setting looked like a private club or high-end restaurant, and the body language suggested this was not a social gathering. On the back of the photograph, in her father's handwriting, was a date that preceded Vivian's introduction to royal circles by 18 months. Who are these men? Isabella asked, showing Mrs. Pembridge the photograph. The older woman adjusted her reading glasses and studied the image carefully. I cannot be certain, but the man to Vivian's left appears to be Victor Kozlov, a businessman with interests in defense contracts and international finance. Your father had concerns about him because several of his companies had been bidding for contracts related to palace security upgrades. This revelation sent a chill down Isabella's spine. If Vivian had been connected to foreign business interests before her marriage to the king, and if those interests had subsequently secured lucrative government contracts, the implications went far beyond mere gold digging or social climbing. This suggested a level of planning and potential espionage that could constitute treason. Isabella's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her contact in the intelligence services. Media attention accelerating timeline. Be to meet today. Location Bravo at 14 o'clock. Location Bravo was their code for a secure meeting point in the old servants' quarters of the East Wing, a section of the palace that had been largely abandoned after renovations had modernized the staff areas. Margaret, I need you to do something for me, and I need you to understand that this request comes with significant personal risk. Isabella closed the folder and met the older woman's eyes directly. I need you to contact Lord Hamilton and arrange a private meeting. Tell him it concerns my father's death and that I have information he will want to see." Mrs. Pembridge nodded without hesitation. "Of course, my lady. Shall I suggest a time and place?" "This evening, after the staff dinner hour, in the blue drawing room. It will be empty at that time, and the location provides multiple exit routes if we need them." Isabella paused, considering the weight of what she was about to say. "Margaret, after tonight, everything changes. If you want to distance yourself from what's coming, I will understand completely and will ensure you have excellent references for whatever position you might seek." The older woman drew herself up to her full height, her expression resolute. "Lady Isabella, I served your grandmother when she faced challenges to the crown that most people never knew about. I served your father during his own struggles with court politics and family pressures. I am not about to abandon you when you need support most. We will see this through together." Before Isabella could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment door. Mrs. Proudo Pembridge moved to answer it, revealing a young palace page looking distinctly uncomfortable about his mission. "Lady Isabella, you are requested to attend upon His Majesty the King in his private study at your earliest convenience," the page announced, his formal training barely concealing his nervousness about being involved in what was clearly a delicate family situation. Isabella exchanged glances with Mrs. Number of Pembridge. The summons had come sooner than expected, which suggested that the pressure from the morning's media coverage had forced the king's hand. There would be no time for careful preparation or strategic planning. The confrontation she had triggered the night before was about to escalate dramatically. "Please inform His Majesty that I will attend him within the quarter hour," Isabella replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. After the page departed, Isabella moved to her wardrobe and selected a navy blue day dress that struck the right balance between respectful and resolute. She was not going to this meeting as a penitent family member seeking forgiveness for a social transgression. She was going as a woman armed with evidence of crimes that went to the heart of the monarchy itself. Mrs. Pembridge helped her prepare, adjusting the fit of the dress and ensuring that Isabella's appearance would project the right combination of dignity and determination. Hidden beneath the elegant exterior, Isabella carried copies of the most damaging evidence from her father's investigation. Documents that could shatter the royal family's public image, but might also be the only way to expose the truth about Prince Marcus's death. "Remember, my lady, the king loved your father deeply. Whatever has happened since Prince Marcus's death, whatever influence the queen consort has gained, the king's feelings for his brother and for you remain genuine. Use that connection, but be prepared for the possibility that he may not be ready to accept what you have to show him." Isabella nodded, understanding the wisdom in this advice. King Edward was not a weak man, but he was a man who had suffered tremendous personal losses and who had found comfort in his second marriage. Asking him to confront the possibility that his wife was responsible for his brother's death would be asking him to question everything he believed about his current life and happiness. As she walked through the palace corridors toward the king's private study, Isabella passed portraits of generations of ancestors who had faced their own challenges to the crown. Some had emerged victorious, their legacies secured for history. Others had fallen, their failures serving as cautionary tales about the price of political miscalculation. The difference was that Isabella was not fighting for political power or personal advancement. She was fighting for justice for her father and for the truth about crimes that threatened the integrity of the monarchy itself. The question was whether the evidence she carried would be enough to convince a king to act against his own wife, and whether she would survive the consequences of forcing that choice upon him. The massive oak doors of the king's private study loomed ahead, guarded by 2 members of the Royal Protection Squad who acknowledged her with respectful nods. Beyond those doors waited a conversation that would either vindicate her father's memory or destroy her own future. Isabella straightened her shoulders, checked that the documents remained secure in her purse, and prepared to change the course of royal history. The king's private study had always been Isabella's sanctuary within the palace, a place where formal protocol gave way to genuine family affection and where she could remember what it felt like to be simply Edward's beloved niece rather than Lady Isabella of the royal house. Today, however, the familiar room felt charged with tension that transformed every cherished memory into a potential weapon in the battle to come. King Edward stood with his back to the door when Isabella entered, his attention focused on the rain-streaked windows that overlooked the palace's private gardens. At 62, he remained an imposing figure, despite the silver threading through his hair and the subtle stoop that had developed since his brother's death. The weight of 5 years on the throne, combined with the personal losses that had shaped his reign, had carved lines of weariness into his face that no amount of royal privilege could erase. "Uncle," Isabella said softly, using the familiar address that had been their private tradition since childhood. He turned slowly, and Isabella was struck by the depth of pain in his eyes. This was not merely the expression of a king dealing with a protocol breach or a public relations crisis. This was the face of a man grappling with the possibility that his family was fracturing in ways that might prove irreparable. Isabella. His voice carried decades of shared history, memories of teaching her to ride in these same gardens, of comforting her after her mother's death, of celebrating her equestrian victories with pride that transcended royal duty. I find myself in the extraordinary position of needing to ask my own niece to explain behavior that has mystified my advisors and horrified the court. She moved to the leather armchair that faced his desk, the same chair where she had sat countless times over the years to share stories of competitions or simply enjoy the company of the uncle who had helped raise her after her parents' deaths. "What would you like to know?" King Edward returned to his own chair, but instead of maintaining the formal distance that his advisors had probably recommended, he leaned forward with the concerned expression of a family member rather than a monarch. "I need to understand what happened last night, Isabella. Your behavior toward Vivian was so completely out of character that I can only assume something has occurred that I am not aware of. Help me understand so that I can help you." The gentle approach was both a relief and a complication. Isabella had prepared for royal displeasure, official condemnation, even formal punishment. She had not prepared for her uncle's genuine concern, an obvious desire to find a solution that would preserve their relationship while addressing the unprecedented breach of protocol. "Before I explain my actions, I need to ask you about something that has been troubling me for 3 years," Isabella began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "I need to ask you about Father's death." The change in King Edward's expression was immediate and profound. The concerned uncle disappeared, replaced by something harder and more guarded. "Isabella, your father's death was thoroughly investigated by the appropriate authorities. It was a tragic accident that occurred during a routine hunting expedition. I understand your grief, but revisiting these painful circumstances will not bring Marcus back. What if it was not an accident?" The question hung between them like a blade, sharp and dangerous and impossible to ignore. King Edward's stillness was absolute for several heartbeats. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had spent 3 years trying to convince himself of something he was not entirely certain he believed. "The investigation was comprehensive, Isabella. The royal coroner, the local police, even an independent safety expert all reached the same conclusion. Your father ventured into restricted hunting grounds during rutting season when the stags were most aggressive. It was a mistake that cost him his life." Isabella reached into her purse and withdrew the folder that Mrs. Pembridge had preserved for 3 years. "Father did not make mistakes about hunting safety. You know that as well as I do. But more importantly, he did not make that particular mistake because he never intended to be in those restricted grounds at all." She placed the first document on his desk, a detailed analysis of the official hunting schedule for that day, annotated in her father's careful handwriting. The schedule showed that Prince Marcus had been assigned to the eastern quadrant of the estate, an area known for its safety and excellent sightlines. The restricted areas where he died were in the opposite direction entirely. "Someone altered his hunting assignment after the official schedule was distributed," Isabella continued, adding a second document that showed the discrepancies between the original schedule and the revised version that had been posted the morning of the hunt. "The person who made these changes had access to the royal household's internal scheduling systems and detailed knowledge of the estate's layout." King Edward studied the documents with growing intensity, his expression shifting from skepticism to troubled recognition. "Even if this is accurate, it could represent administrative error rather than malicious intent. Palace scheduling systems are complex and mistakes do occur." Isabella placed a photograph on the desk, one of the images from her father's investigation showing Queen Consort Vivienne meeting with unknown men in what appeared to be a business setting. Father was investigating financial irregularities within the royal household. He discovered evidence that Vivienne had been planning her integration into our family for years before she ever met you. He believed she had placed allies within the palace staff who were providing her with information about our family's activities, schedules, and security protocols. The king's face had gone pale as he examined the photograph. "Where did you get this?" Father left detailed records of his investigation with Mrs. Pembridge, with instructions to share them with me if anything happened to him. Isabella's voice remained steady, but she could see the impact of her words in her uncle's expression. He suspected that his investigation had been discovered, and that he might be in danger. She placed the final document on the desk, bank records showing the systematic payments from foreign accounts to individuals who had subsequently been hired into key positions within the palace hierarchy. Vivienne did not simply marry into our family for love or even for social advancement. She orchestrated a carefully planned operation that gave her unprecedented access to royal family information and the ability to influence events within the palace. King Edward pushed back from his desk and stood abruptly, moving to the windows where he had been standing when Isabella arrived. The silence stretched between them as he processed the implications of what she had shown him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Even if all of this is true, even if Vivienne's motives were not what they appeared to be, that does not prove she was responsible for Marcus's death. Isabella joined him at the window, standing close enough to touch his arm gently. "Uncle, look at me. You know Father better than anyone except possibly me. Do you truly believe he would have made the series of errors that the official investigation claims led to his death?" The king's reflection in the rain-streaked glass showed a man aging years and moments as he confronted possibilities he had spent 3 years avoiding.
"No," he admitted finally.
Marcus was the most careful, methodical person I have ever known. The idea that he would ignore safety protocols or venture into restricted areas without proper preparation was completely contrary to his nature. The morning he died, he told Mrs. Pembridge that he had discovered something important about Vivienne's background and that he planned to discuss it with you when he returned from the hunt. Isabella's voice was gentle but relentless. He never got the chance to have that conversation because someone made sure he would not return from that hunt alive. King Edward turned from the window to face her directly. "Isabella, do you understand what you are asking me to believe? You are suggesting that my wife murdered my brother, that the woman I have shared my bed and my crown with for 5 years is a calculating killer who has deceived me about everything. I am asking you to consider the evidence and draw your own conclusions," Isabella replied. "But I am also asking you to think about the other changes that have occurred since Vivienne's arrival. How many of Father's closest friends have been gradually excluded from court? How many longtime palace staff members have been reassigned or encouraged to retire? How often have you found yourself isolated from advisors who might question her influence?" The king's expression suggested that Isabella's questions were hitting uncomfortably close to observations he had made himself, but had attributed to natural changes in court dynamics rather than deliberate manipulation. "Vivienne has strong opinions about palace efficiency and security. Some of the changes she has recommended have been beneficial, and others have served to isolate you from people who knew you before her arrival and who might recognize changes in your decision-making patterns or priorities." Isabella pulled out her phone and showed him a news article dated from earlier that morning. "Uncle, this morning's international coverage is not just about my behavior at the gala. Several outlets are raising questions about recent changes in the kingdom's foreign policy positions, particularly regarding defense contracts and international business relationships." The article she showed him detailed concerns from allied nations about the kingdom's shifting positions on several key issues, all of which had occurred after Queen Consort Vivienne had gained influence over palace communications and policy discussions. The timing and nature of these changes suggested coordination with external interests rather than organic evolution of royal policy. King Edward read the article with growing alarm. "These policy positions were developed through normal consultation with my advisors and cabinet ministers. Advisors and ministers who were often briefed by staff members who report directly to Vivienne," Isabella pointed out. "The network Father discovered was not just about gathering information, it was about influencing decisions at the highest levels of government." Before the king could respond, a sharp knock interrupted their conversation. A royal aide entered without waiting for permission, his face flushed with urgency. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but Queen Consort Vivienne is requesting an immediate audience. She says the matter cannot wait for your scheduled meeting this afternoon." Isabella and King Edward exchanged glances. The timing of Vivienne's request, so soon after Isabella's arrival at the king's study, suggested that the Queen Consort's network of palace informants remained active and effective. Someone had reported Isabella's meeting with the king, and Vivienne was moving to control the narrative before Isabella could present her evidence effectively. "Tell Her Majesty that I am currently engaged in important family business and will meet with her as previously scheduled," King Edward replied, his tone carrying enough authority to discourage further questioning. After the aide departed, the king turned back to Isabella with an expression that combined determination with deep sadness. "If what you have shown me is true, then I have been living a lie for 5 years. I have allowed the woman responsible for my brother's death to share my bed and influence my crown. The implications for the monarchy, for the kingdom itself, are staggering." Isabella took his hand, offering comfort in the way she had when she was a child, and he was dealing with the pressures of being heir to the throne. "We could expose the truth and seek justice for Father, but we need to be strategic about how we proceed. Vivienne has had years to build her network and establish her position. She will not go quietly. What do you recommend? I have been working with someone from the intelligence services who helped father with his investigation. We have additional evidence that corroborates everything I have shown you, including proof of the financial network and evidence about the hunting schedule alterations. But we need to move carefully to avoid giving Vivienne time to destroy evidence or eliminate witnesses. King Edward nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to trust me for the next 24 hours. Continue to act normally, attend your scheduled meetings with Vivienne, but do not reveal what I have told you. Give me time to coordinate with my contact and ensure that all the evidence is secured before we move against her.
And then?
Isabella's expression was resolute. Then we expose everything. The murder, the espionage network, the foreign connections, all of it. We let the proper authorities handle the legal proceedings, and we restore honor to father's memory. King Edward was quiet for several minutes, staring at the documents spread across his desk as if they contained the blueprint for dismantling his entire world, which in many ways they did. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. 24 hours, Isabella. But understand that once we start down this path, there will be no turning back. The scandal will be enormous, and the damage to the monarchy's reputation may be irreparable.
Isabella nodded, understanding the magnitude of what lay ahead.
Father always said that the crown's authority comes from the people's trust, and that trust must be earned through truth and justice. We cannot maintain that trust by covering up murder and treason, no matter how painful the exposure might be. As Isabella prepared to leave the king's study, her phone buzzed with another encrypted message. Package compromised. They know. You need protection now. The war for truth was escalating more rapidly than anyone had anticipated, and Isabella realized that the next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of justice for her father, but quite possibly her own survival. The evening shadows stretched long across the palace grounds as Isabella made her way through the seldom-used corridors of the East Wing, her footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. The encrypted message warning her that her evidence package had been compromised added an urgency to her movements that she struggled to conceal from the palace staff she encountered along the way. Every security guard, every cleaning person, every administrative assistant was now a potential threat. Someone who might be reporting her movements to Queen Consort Vivienne's network. The blue drawing room, chosen for her meeting with Lord Hamilton, occupied a corner of the palace that had been largely abandoned since the renovations of the 1990s. Its formal furnishings remained intact, but the room was rarely used except for small private gatherings or overflow seating during major state functions. More importantly for Isabella's purposes, it offered multiple exit routes and was situated far enough from the main palace operations that conversations could be held without electronic surveillance. Lord Hamilton was already waiting when she arrived, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. At 65, he remained trim and alert, with the kind of watchful awareness that never fully left career soldiers even in retirement. He had served with distinction in 3 different conflicts before transitioning to royal protection duties, and his loyalty to the crown was matched only by his devotion to Prince Marcus's memory. Lady Isabella, I came as quickly as Mrs. Pembridge's message allowed. His voice carried concern mixed with the kind of professional alertness that suggested he understood this meeting was about far more than social catching up. She indicated you have information about your father that I should see. Isabella gestured for him to take a seat in one of the high-backed chairs positioned away from the windows, then moved to close the door fully and check the adjacent spaces to ensure they were truly alone. Her intelligence contact had taught her basic surveillance detection techniques, and while she was far from expert level, she had learned enough to spot obvious threats. Lord Hamilton, before I show you what I have discovered, I need to ask you a direct question, and I need your word as a soldier and as my father's friend that you will answer truthfully. Isabella settled into the chair facing him, her expression serious enough to command his full attention. Do you believe my father's death was an accident? The question hung in the air between them for several heartbeats while Hamilton's expression shifted from diplomatic courtesy to something much more personal and painful. Isabella could see him weighing the implications of honest response against the comfort of official explanations that allowed everyone to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. No, he said finally, his voice carrying the weight of 3 years of suppressed doubts and unanswered questions. Marcus was the most competent outdoorsman I ever knew. The idea that he would make the series of errors that supposedly led to his death was completely contrary to everything I understood about his character and capabilities. Isabella felt a surge of relief at his honesty. Then you will understand why I have spent 3 years investigating the circumstances of his death, and why I believe I have discovered evidence that proves he was murdered. She produced the folder containing her father's research, but this time she had organized the documents in a sequence designed to build a compelling case rather than simply present raw information. The first item was a detailed timeline showing the discrepancies between Prince Marcus's intended hunting schedule and his actual location at the time of death. Lord Hamilton studied the timeline with the careful attention of someone accustomed to analyzing military intelligence reports. This level of schedule manipulation would require access to multiple systems within the palace administration, not something that could be accomplished by someone outside the royal household. Exactly. And the person responsible needed detailed knowledge of the hunting grounds, the seasonal animal behavior patterns, and the specific security protocols that govern royal outdoor activities. Isabella showed him the amended hunting schedule with its suspicious alterations. Someone wanted father in that specific location at that exact time, knowing full well what would happen to him there. Hamilton's expression darkened as he processed the implications. Who had access to make these changes? Isabella placed the next set of documents on the small table between them. The financial records showing systematic payments to palace staff members who had been hired in the months before the king's second marriage. Queen Consort Vivian had been placing her own people within the palace hierarchy for years before she ever married Uncle Edward. This network gave her access to scheduling systems, security protocols, and detailed information about our family's activities. The former soldier's training was evident in how he processed each piece of evidence, asking pointed questions about sources, verification methods, and potential alternative explanations. But Isabella could see growing alarm in his expression as the pattern of deliberate manipulation became undeniable. Lady Isabella, if this evidence is accurate, we are dealing with something far more serious than an ambitious social climber who married into the royal family. This suggests a sophisticated intelligence operation with foreign backing and long-term strategic objectives. Hamilton looked up from the documents with grim determination. What other evidence do you have? Isabella's phone buzzed with an encrypted message just as she was about to respond. The content made her blood run cold. Vivian knows about tonight's meeting. Get out now, trust no one. She showed the message to Hamilton, whose military instincts immediately kicked into high gear. He moved to the windows to scan the grounds below, while Isabella gathered the documents and prepared for rapid departure. I see additional security personnel taking positions around this wing of the palace, Hamilton reported quietly. Professional deployment pattern, not the usual royal protection protocols. Someone is moving to contain us. Isabella's mind raced through the implications. If Vivian's network had detected their meeting and was moving to prevent them from sharing information, it meant the Queen Consort was willing to take significant risks to protect her secrets. It also meant that Isabella and Hamilton were now in immediate physical danger. There is a service staircase behind the pantry area that connects to the old servants' quarters, Isabella whispered. We can reach it through the kitchen corridor if we move quickly. Hamilton nodded, his expression grim but focused. Lead the way. But first, give me any additional evidence you have. If something happens to you, that information needs to survive to reach the proper authorities. Isabella handed him a secure digital storage device that contained copies of all her father's research, plus additional evidence her intelligence contact had gathered over the past 3 years. Everything is on there, including proof of the foreign financial connections and evidence about the hunting schedule alterations. There are also audio recordings of conversations between Vivian and her handlers. Audio recordings? Hamilton's eyebrows rose in surprise. Father was more thorough than any of us realized. He had been secretly recording certain conversations in the weeks before his death, including phone calls he overheard Vivian making in what she thought were private locations. Isabella's voice was barely audible as she checked the door for sounds of approaching footsteps. The recordings proved that she was reporting our family's activities to external contacts and receiving instructions about how to influence palace policy decisions. They moved toward the door, but before Hamilton could open it, they heard the unmistakable sound of multiple sets of footsteps approaching through the main corridor. Professional footsteps that maintained careful spacing and tactical positioning, not the casual gait of palace staff going about routine duties. Hamilton gestured for Isabella to move toward the alternate exit he had spotted near the room's far corner. A door that led to what had once been a private staircase for servants to move between floors without being seen by the royal family or their guests. The irony of using servants' passages to escape royal persecution was not lost on either of them. The narrow staircase was dimly lit and showed signs of neglect, but it was structurally sound and, more importantly, unknown to most current palace security personnel who had been hired within the past 5 years.
As they descended carefully, Hamilton's phone buzzed with a message that made him pause.
"It's from my contact in the intelligence services," he whispered to Isabella. "They have received intelligence that suggests an attempt on your life is being planned for tonight." The situation has escalated beyond what any of us anticipated. Isabella felt fear and anger warring in her chest. Fear for her immediate safety, but anger at the realization that Vivian was willing to commit additional murders to protect her secrets. How many people has she killed, Lord Hamilton? How many deaths is she responsible for beyond my father's? I suspect we are about to find out. But right now, our priority is ensuring that you survive long enough for this evidence to reach people who can act on it. Hamilton checked his weapon, something Isabella had not realized he was carrying until this moment. My contact has arranged for a secure extraction point outside the palace grounds. We need to reach it without being detected by Vivian's people or by palace security who might not understand the situation. They reached the bottom of the servants' staircase and found themselves in a narrow corridor that connected to the palace's main kitchen facilities. The kitchens would still have staff preparing for the evening meal service, which meant potential witnesses, but also possible cover for their movements. Isabella's phone buzzed again with a message that changed everything. King Edward compromised. Vivian drugged his evening tea. He is unconscious and may not recover. You are now the only threat to her position. Run. The implications hit Isabella like a physical blow. If something happened to King Edward, Queen Consort Vivienne would be positioned to influence the succession process and potentially secure her position permanently. Isabella was no longer just seeking justice for her father. She was potentially the only person who could prevent Vivienne from consolidating complete control over the monarchy. Lord Hamilton, we need to change our plan. Vivienne has moved against Uncle Edward. If he dies, she will be in position to manipulate the succession and eliminate anyone who threatens her authority. Hamilton's expression showed he understood the broader implications. Then we are not just gathering evidence for future prosecution. We are fighting to prevent a successful coup that would place a foreign agent in effective control of the crown. As they approached the kitchen area, Isabella realized that their escape from the palace was only the beginning of a much larger battle. The evidence they carried could expose Vivian's crimes and foreign connections, but only if they could survive long enough to deliver it to people with the authority and courage to act on it. The sound of rapid footsteps echoing through the corridors above them indicated that their pursuers had discovered their exit from the blue drawing room and were now conducting a systematic search of the East Wing. Time was running out, and the stakes had just escalated from personal justice to national security. Isabella and Hamilton moved through the kitchen area as quietly as possible, using the bustle of dinner preparation as cover for their passage toward the exterior exit that would lead to their extraction point. But both of them understood that escaping the palace was only the first step in what would now be a fight for the very soul of the monarchy itself. The war for truth had become a war for survival, and everything Isabella had ever known about her life, her family, and her country was about to change forever. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Lady Isabella Thornfield stood before the International Criminal Court in The Hague, her testimony having just concluded in what had become the most significant royal scandal of the century. The woman who had once been known primarily for her equestrian achievements was now recognized as the person whose courage had exposed an international conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government across multiple nations. The morning newspapers spread across the hotel room table told a story that seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. Yet every detail had been meticulously documented and verified through months of investigation by intelligence services from 6 different countries. Foreign agent network exposed through royal murder, read the headline of the International Herald, while the Guardian's front page proclaimed, "The spy would be Queen, how Vivian Kozlov nearly succeeded in infiltrating the British crown." Isabella's intelligence contact, revealed now to be Commander Sarah Mitchell of MI5, sat across from her reviewing the final witness statements that would be entered into evidence that afternoon. The woman who had spent 3 years carefully building the case against Vivian's network had become both Isabella's protector and her partner in seeking justice for crimes that extended far beyond Prince Marcus's murder. The financial trail alone implicated 15 individuals across 4 countries, Commander Mitchell explained, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had spent years pursuing an extraordinarily complex case. Vivian, or Elena Kozlova, as we now know her real name was, had been placed by Russian intelligence services specifically to gain access to British defense contracts and foreign policy information. Your father's murder was necessitated because his investigation was getting too close to exposing the entire operation. Through the hotel room windows, Isabella could see protesters gathered outside the courthouse demanding justice for what they called the greatest betrayal in royal history. Public sentiment had overwhelmingly supported Isabella once the evidence became public, with many viewing her as a heroic figure who had sacrificed her comfortable royal life to expose crimes against the crown itself. The road to this moment had been harrowing and dangerous. The night Isabella and Lord Hamilton escaped from the palace, they had been pursued by armed agents who had orders to eliminate them before they could share their evidence. Only the intervention of MI5 operatives, who had been conducting their own parallel investigation, had saved their lives during a confrontation in the grounds of a safe house outside London. King Edward had survived the poisoning attempt, though he had spent 2 weeks in intensive care while his system processed the exotic toxin that Vivian had used in his evening tea. The experience had aged him considerably, but it had also strengthened his resolve to see justice done regardless of the personal cost to his reputation or the monarchy's public image.
How is Uncle Edward handling the aftermath? Isabella asked, setting aside the newspaper coverage to focus on more personal concerns.
Commander Mitchell's expression softened. Better than we had hoped. The medical team believes he will make a full recovery, and the psychiatric evaluation suggests that while he feels betrayed and manipulated, he does not blame himself for failing to recognize Vivian's true nature earlier. Her operation was sophisticated enough to fool intelligence professionals. Expecting a grieving widower to see through it was unrealistic. The investigation had revealed that Vivian's infiltration had begun years before she ever met King Edward. She had systematically researched the royal family's vulnerabilities, identified King Edward as a target during his period of grief after his first wife's death, and orchestrated their chance meeting at a charity gala with the precision of a military operation. Every aspect of their courtship had been carefully planned to exploit his emotional needs and his desire for companionship. Isabella's phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Pembridge, who had become something of a celebrity herself as the loyal servant who had preserved evidence for 3 years while secretly supporting Isabella's investigation. Trial coverage excellent. Palace staff morale improving. Your uncle asks when you plan to come home. The question of returning to royal life was one that Isabella had been avoiding for months. The media attention had been overwhelming, with interview requests from every major news organization and book deals that could have made her wealthy in her own right. But more fundamentally, she was no longer certain whether she wanted to resume the role of dutiful royal niece after having tasted the freedom of acting independently in pursuit of justice. I think I need more time before making decisions about my future with the royal family, Isabella told Commander Mitchell. The horses miss me, and I miss them, but I'm not sure I can go back to ribbon cuttings and ceremonial appearances after everything that has happened. Commander Mitchell nodded with understanding. Your testimony this week has been remarkable, Isabella. You have shown extraordinary courage in pursuing the truth despite significant personal risk. Whatever you decide about your royal role, know that you have earned the respect of intelligence professionals around the world. The trial itself had been a media sensation, with every revelation about Vivian's network generating new headlines and forcing governments across Europe to reevaluate their own security protocols. The evidence had shown that Vivian's operation was just one part of a much larger campaign to infiltrate Western institutions, with similar agents having been placed in positions of influence throughout European society. Lord Hamilton, who had become Isabella's closest advisor throughout the investigation, entered the hotel room carrying that morning's security briefing. At 75, he had found new purpose in helping expose the truth about Prince Marcus's death, and had emerged as a key witness whose military credentials gave weight to the more technical aspects of the evidence. The prosecution expects to conclude their case tomorrow, he reported, settling into the chair beside Isabella's. The defense attorney's arguments about Vivian acting independently rather than as part of a state-sponsored operation have been completely undermined by the communications intercepts and financial records. Isabella had found watching Vivian during the trial to be both satisfying and disturbing. The woman who had once commanded such presence and authority now appeared diminished and defeated, her carefully constructed persona having crumbled under the weight of evidence about her true identity and motivations. Yet Isabella could not forget the years of manipulation and the coldly calculated murder of her father. Have there been any developments regarding the other individuals in her network? Isabella asked. 14 arrests across 4 countries so far, with more expected as the investigation continues. Commander Mitchell replied, The communications you helped us recover have provided intelligence about similar operations targeting other European royal families and government officials. Your father's investigation may have prevented a much broader conspiracy from succeeding. The personal cost had been enormous for everyone involved. King Edward faced the humiliation of having been deceived so completely, though public sympathy for him had been stronger than anyone had anticipated. The royal family's approval ratings had actually increased as people recognized that they too had been victims of a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation. Isabella's own life had been transformed in ways she was still processing. The shy equestrian who had once preferred the company of horses to the pressures of court life had become a public figure whose story inspired people around the world. Yet the attention was overwhelming, and she longed for the quiet certainty of her former life, even as she recognized that person no longer existed. "There is something else you should know," Commander Mitchell said, her tone indicating significant news. "The intelligence services have offered you a position as a consultant on royal security matters. Your insights into palace operations and your proven ability to handle classified information could be valuable in preventing similar infiltrations in the future." The offer was tempting in ways Isabella had not expected. The work would be meaningful and would allow her to use the knowledge she had gained through this ordeal to protect others. It would also provide an alternative to returning to traditional royal duties while still serving her country in an important capacity. Before she could respond, her phone rang with a call from King Edward himself. These conversations had become a regular part of their recovery process, a way for uncle and niece to rebuild their relationship while processing the trauma they had both experienced. "Uncle," she answered, stepping onto the hotel room balcony for privacy. "My dear Isabella, I have been following the trial coverage, and I want you to know how proud I am of the strength and dignity you have shown throughout this ordeal." His voice was stronger than it had been in months, suggesting that testifying against Vivian had been cathartic for him as well. "You saved not just our family, but potentially our entire system of government." "I did what Father would have wanted me to do," Isabella replied, looking out over the international courthouse where justice was finally being served. "I could not let his death be meaningless. It was far from meaningless, and neither was your sacrifice in exposing the truth. But I want to ask you something important. When are you coming home?" The question she had been avoiding could no longer be postponed. Isabella thought about the horses waiting in the royal stables, about the charities that had supported her work for years, about the life of service that her family had always represented. But she also thought about the freedom she had discovered in pursuing justice independently, and the possibility of continuing that work in new ways. "I think I am ready to come home, Uncle. But I want to discuss some changes to how I serve the crown. I have learned that I am capable of more than ceremonial appearances and charity patronages." King Edward's laugh was the first genuinely joyful sound she had heard from him since before Vivian's arrival in their lives. "I think we can arrange something suitable for a young woman who has just helped expose the greatest threat to the crown in modern history. Come home, Isabella. We need you, and I suspect you need us as well." As Isabella ended the call and returned to the hotel room, she felt something she had not experienced in years: genuine excitement about her future. The evidence had been presented, justice was being served, and she was ready to begin the next chapter of her life with hard-won wisdom about the price of truth and the importance of courage. Commander Mitchell looked up from her final reports with a knowing smile. "Going home? Yes, but on my own terms this time." Isabella gathered her belongings with the confidence of someone who had faced down international conspiracies and emerged victorious. "There is work to be done, horses to ride, and a kingdom to serve. But I will be doing it as someone who knows the difference between loyalty and blind obedience." The trial would conclude within days. Vivian would spend the rest of her life in prison for murder and espionage, and the international conspiracy had been exposed and dismantled. But more importantly for Isabella, she had honored her father's memory and proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption and evil is simply the courage to speak the truth, regardless of the personal cost. As she prepared to return to England and to her royal duties, Isabella reflected on the journey that had begun with a single moment of defiance at the Harvest Gala. That moment had seemed like an ending, the destruction of her comfortable royal life. Instead, it had been a beginning, the birth of a woman who understood that true nobility comes not from titles or tradition, but from the willingness to fight for justice even when that fight demands everything you have. The war for truth had been won, but Isabella understood that defending truth was not a single battle but a lifelong commitment. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest service to the crown requires standing against the crown itself, and that loyalty to higher principles must always supersede loyalty to individuals, no matter how powerful or beloved they might be.